Hello there, hi. Welcome to Butterfly Effect, a podcast all about interviewing people. I'm your host, Tristan Ettleman. Let's talk about something else before we get to that interviewing part. I've got another movie report for you. I've been watching a lot of movies the past couple weeks, catching up on releases. And I went and saw Green Room. It's a fucking terrifying movie. Just absolutely terrifying. It stressed me out. If you're not familiar, Green Room, it's about this punk band that plays this kind of remote neo-Nazi compound bar place. And then one of the guys goes back into the green room to grab someone's phone, and they witness a murder, and then neo-Nazis attack them while they're assaulted. You know, they're locked in the green room being assaulted and stuff like that. It's an intense movie, man. Thriller, horror, in the truest sense, in that it's real evil people, not any kind of monster or supernatural thing. Patrick Stewart is... I've never felt that evil from Patrick Stewart in a movie. I'm sure he's done a villain or something before, but I've never seen it, never felt it from him. Great performance from everyone, and you should check it out. Very good movie. And speaking of good movies, good horror movies that kind of impressed me, my guest today is Richard Vreeland, also known as Disasterpeace. Who has composed many video games, including Fez. He's done like a bunch of video games, some self-release stuff, but he may be most well known for composing the film It Follows, which I love. I love that movie. One of the best horror movies in a while, and the soundtrack and the score is a big part of that, because it really sets the tone. It establishes like the pseudo 80s vibe of the movie. Very synthy, very John Carpenter, which I never asked him about Carpenter, but yeah. So that movie's really good. He's done a lot of great music for a ton of video games, and so we talk about all that. And Rich was a cool guy, very smart, reserved dude that seems to have a cool path going. So I'm excited to see whatever he does next. He did most recently Hyperlight Drifter. That the music, man, music. We talk about it. So I'll see you on the other side. So what have you been up to lately?
Well, just wrapped up Hyperlight Drifter, which I was working on for a long time.
Yeah.
And so last couple weeks been taking it pretty easy, but just starting to get back into some working on a couple of new projects that I'm excited about. So.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that you're doing more stuff, because you're a very prolific guy. I mean, I look through the list of stuff, and I'm like, man, he's done a lot of games and self-release stuff, and
yeah, I've been at it for a decade, so
yeah. And you started pretty early too.
Yeah, I started doing game stuff when I was probably maybe 19 or 20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that young for game stuff, or video game composers?
I think that's about right.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people that I know kind of started getting, because it's the beginning of a career path, so,
Sure.
College age type period makes sense.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Hyperlight Drifter. I know a lot of people are loving the game, and specifically the music, too. How's the response to that been?
It's been really positive. People seem to really like it. So yeah.
Well, it's very. I mean, this is something we'll probably talk about later. But your stuff is very atmospheric, it sets the tone really, really well. And Hyperlight Drifter I haven't played very much of, but from what I've heard and what I've played, it sets the mood really, really well.
Great.
And I think people respond to that.
Yeah, that was the intention for sure.
Yeah. I bet. Where did you grow up? Or where were you born?
Grew up in Staten Island, New York.
Okay, and did you grow up there?
Yes.
And how was that experience? I've never been to Staten Island.
It's an interesting place.
Yeah.
It's part of New York City, but it feels somewhat separate. Pretty suburban, pretty isolated. Yeah, I don't know. My stepfather was a music director at our church, so there would be band practice in the house, and my mom played piano. My sister was a singer since from a young age, so I was surrounded by music.
So you had that music influence early on.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because people that go into artistic endeavors or whatever, you either have the experience with like really supportive parents or parents that do the thing, or parents that like don't really get it, but somehow, you just get latched onto that artistic stuff. But it's cool that they did the thing. They did the music.
Yeah, they did the thing, but I think at the same time, I kind of branched out in my own direction.
Sure.
And,
well, yeah, I mean, music for like a church service versus like, chiptune stuff, I'm sure are very different.
Yeah. And I mean, my mom plays piano, but she'll ask me, well, what key should I buy this sheet music in if I'm going to sing it? So.
But so you had that awesome musical influence there, and the city was there if you wanted to go there. You said it was kind of removed, isolated somewhat. But did you go into the city a lot as a kid?
Not really. On occasion, my dad worked in the city for a long time, so I would go with him sometimes to his workplace. But yeah, I mean, we spent most of our time on the island. So
had everything you needed there.
Yeah, I guess so. Except culture.
Well, yeah. Well, so what was the culture?
It's very family oriented. It's heavily. It's a really. When I was growing up, very much a Italian American type community. When I was growing up, it had the highest Italian American population as far as density goes. I think it was like over half of the people on the island had Italian heritage. So that was that was definitely a big part of my upbringing. Yeah, I mean, there wasn't a lot, as far as like the arts go, I mean, I wasn't really exposed to a whole lot of that stuff except for kind of the, the music stuff that my stepfather was doing. He was, he had some original music that he was also doing, and he was in a cover band for a while. And
what were they covering?
He was in a band called the Blue Meanies, and they did Beatles covers.
Awesome.
And yeah, so I mean, he was a big influence on me because he was a really creative guy.
Yeah.
Who he would write his own stories, and he was a photographer. So that was definitely a big influence on me.
And were you playing lots of games?
Yeah, was definitely way into video games and computer games, and spent a lot of my childhood playing games. And
were you talking like NES, or are you a little bit past that? I don't know.
Yeah, starting with NES. I'm 29.
Okay.
So starting with NES, and then moving to Super Nintendo and Genesis, and N64 and PlayStation.
Yeah.
And
well, obviously that 8-bit sound stuck with you.
Oh yeah, for sure. It was definitely when I found out that I could actually make music like that when I was younger. I was kind of like blown away. I was like, "Whoa, I can do this!" And and then I started, messing with that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
I don't really think about it though, right? I don't really think about it anymore so much when I'm writing. I don't think, "Oh, this is 8-bit or whatever."
Sure.
I think it just kind of
it's music.
Yeah, it's music, and I think it maybe just kind of comes through a little bit. But
well, how did you discover that you could make music like that?
Well, I was when I started, I was a guitar player, and I was doing a lot of recording,
Mm-hmm.
and that was kind of the direction I thought I was going in. And I was trying to do like tracks that were where I'd record guitar and bass and kind of get it to sound good. But I was young and I had no idea what I was doing, and it was really tough.
Mm-hmm.
And then I kind of stumbled into people were making chiptune type stuff using their original music, and I was like, how can I do this? And I was using guitar tablature software to get my ideas down, and I found that I could write for other instruments with that and bring it into like GarageBand or whatever and start messing with some really basic synthesizers. And it was a lot quicker to kind of get the ideas down and in a state that, I was happy with, and then I could move on. So as a young, I felt like I was exposed to music for a long time, but I didn't really get into it myself until I was older, like probably in high school. So when I finally started writing, I felt like I had a ton of ideas that I needed to get down. And so, spending a month on one track was really frustrating. So it was a blessing, I think, to have discovered the chip stuff.
Yeah, definitely. It's kind of a distilled, like, medium, kind of the way you're saying. Like, it just feels like it's boiled down to, like, just the sounds. It's like people would say it's simple, but in being simple, you can do a lot with it, and I think you've shown that.
It gave me a focus. I mean, at the time, I didn't know any better. I just thought, chip music was, square waves or whatever, and I wasn't thinking about any of the production stuff, really. Panning, that's about it. Maybe some volume mixing. That was about it. So it was, all the sounds I was using were basically the same sounds, and so it was really quick to iterate on ideas, because it'd be like, here's a track, I'll just use this sound, okay, and then write whatever, and then, I'll make another track, use the same sound.
Well, you said you got into music in high school. What was some of that music you were getting into that made you want to make it?
Well, yeah, when I started playing guitar in high school, and so, around that time I had started listening to more rock type stuff and new metal and all that kind of stuff. So, the first couple of bands that I got really into were probably Tool and Rage Against the Machine.
Great bands.
Yeah, and probably to a lesser extent, Led Zeppelin. And so, I was learning some of that stuff and kind of being inspired by it. And I feel like those two bands, Tool and Rage, have a very specific sort of connection as far as, like, there's like a focus on kind of patterns and riffs, and so that became very central to a lot of the stuff that I started writing. I was really interested in patterns and messing with time signatures. Yeah,
Tools does that a lot. I feel like they got some do some weird stuff. It's good though. But so you're discovering this love for music in high school. Were there people around you that also felt that way? You said like the culture was a little different on Staten Island, but
yeah, I mean there were people in my high school who played music, but high school was pretty cliquey. I wasn't
sure.
My friend group wasn't especially musical, so I kind of kept it to myself for the most part.
Yeah.
And then it's funny because I kind of made friends with, a couple of the musicians from my high school after school, like years later.
just like connecting somewhere else? Or,
yeah.
I don't know. Are you still on Staten Island?
No. I live in California now. I live in Berkeley.
Okay. So did you meet them elsewhere, or was that still in that area?
Well, I mean, there's this guy that I went to school with. He was in my class, and we kind of got closer through a friend of my sister's who also went to my school but was younger, and we probably like a year or two after high school we would jam. When I was in, when we were all in town, we would jam, which was a lot of fun. And fast forward like 10 years later, and my friend Matt, who I went to high school with, he's mastered a bunch of my albums.
Oh, cool.
So he went to school for record engineering.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Small world, I guess.
Yeah, totally.
So what'd you do after high school? Did you go to college?
Yeah, I went to Rochester Institute of Technology for a year, and had an intention to do graphic design and web design and web development, but kind of got myself in a rut by not applying for an arts program and applying for a science program.
Right.
And so the first year was really great. It was a lot of artsy stuff. You know, we did typography and animation and programming and all this sort of stuff. But then the second year was like the business of printing, and that seemed to be the trajectory. And so I needed to get out of there.
Yeah. So you didn't finish out?
No, after a year I dropped out and I applied to music school. And,
did you finish out there?
Music school?
Or go to Yeah,
so after I dropped out of RIT, I applied to Berklee College of Music in Boston, and I went there and I graduated.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And were you making music during this time? I know you put out some self-release stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I started. I probably started writing stuff in 2004, which was my first year of college.
Okay.
So before I even went to music school, I was writing.
Yeah.
And so that when I applied to music school, I had like 2 albums, I think, that I had already released at that point.
Yeah. Which ones were those? I listened through some of the back catalog.
Yeah, I think they were 8-Byte and the Warring Nations and the Chronicles of Jamage, the Jam Mage.
Yeah, I love that name, by the way.
Thank you.
Well, it's cool because they're like concept albums, right?
Yeah,
yeah. That's what I got from it.
Totally.
And that's a cool idea, especially right off the cuff, making this kind of narrative.
Yeah. That's kind of where I started. I think I was definitely listening to a lot of Dream Theater around that time. So that was an inspiration for sure.
Sure.
And I remember that 8-Byte was very much inspired by Lord of the Rings. Just this idea of like some kind of epic battle or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, it seems like you have a lot of diverse influences. Like there's some kind of like something had like some prog rock kind of feel to it to me. I don't know if that's just me making stuff up in my head, but were you ever did you ever have a phase or get into prog rock or anything like that?
Oh, sure. I mean, around the time that, after Tool, I went way down that route as far as getting into prog stuff. I was big.
It's kind of evolution of prog.
Sure. I was big into King Crimson and Yes. And I was always there was like a couple of years where I was always on the hunt for like the latest greatest prog band.
Yeah.
And I found it difficult to find a prog band that I really liked. There was a band called Ocean Size that I liked a lot for a bit. But I think I from an early stage of my music career, I was kind of formulating a very particular set of like aesthetic values, and so a lot of music would maybe have elements that I liked, or maybe just in general wouldn't really be the kind of style that I'd be into.
Sure. Well, what do you listen to mostly now?
I'm kind of all over the map right now. I've been in a phase the last probably couple of years where I've just been listening to people's recommendations. I just keep lists of things, so whenever someone mentions something, I write it down. So I have like a crazy list of like music to check out. So every day I'm listening to some new thing that I haven't really heard before.
That's great.
Yeah, and every once in a while I'll go back to an artist I like, and I'm like, oh, they have a new record, and I'll check that out. So yeah, kind of.
But you're keeping up within the world.
Trying.
Because
it's getting hard.
Music is so universal. It's hard to. It's like not like like video games or even movies or something like that where there's like a release schedule that you can check of stuff and like what's the new big thing coming out. Whereas music is like, everyone's making it and that there's so much good stuff.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
It's hard to pin down what to listen to. But the recommendations thing totally helps out. I do the same thing in a way. So were there like majors that you went into, or was there like a kind of a track that you had to select when you went there?
Yeah. So, it's a pretty diverse music school. You can study all sorts of things there, and the first 2 years or so, you just do core curriculum type stuff. So you do ear training, you study harmony, you study counterpoint, you study arranging, conducting, like all these sorts of things. And then at some point, you start looking at like a more specific program, like a major. And so I actually tried to do I thought maybe I wanted to do recording, like record engineering, and I actually didn't get into that program. And then I reapplied to music synthesis, which turned out to be a much better fit for me as far as what I wanted to do. I think I thought I had to do something that was more blue collar, and I thought because that would be more stable to be like someone who records people or whatever, working in a studio,
or producing or something.
Yeah, like working in a music studio or something. Like I didn't really know what I wanted.
Sure.
But at the synthesis program, it really kind of allowed me to continue along the path that I had already started. A lot of the stuff I was learning was really applicable to my work, which was great. Learning how to mix, learning about all sorts of audio effects, mixing, learning about signal flow and how to use synthesizers, learning about sound design, learning about working with clients. Like we had this one class where every week we'd get an assignment. We'd all get the same assignment, and it'd be like a theoretical client who had a very specific project. Like they were doing a car commercial, and they wanted it to sound brown. Like they give you a bunch of adjectives that are meant to kind of mess with you, but there were like some references, and then you'd have to come in and try to write that. And every week it was something completely different. It'd be like a car commercial, or like a fashion show music, or like it was all over the map. And it was one of my favorite classes, actually.
Well, it sounds like it kind of got you accustomed to creating music for something, like a visual aspect of it as well. Which of course is something that you do now.
Yeah, well, I would say what's interesting is that I started doing work for hire when I was really young, probably like maybe 13 or 14. Oh, wow. I was into this thing when I was a kid called e-wrestling, which is like you make up your own wrestling character, and you belong to like a league of wrestlers, and you have to write stories about your wrestler, and they depending on who writes a better story or whatever will win their match. Yeah. So
That's cool.
It was fun as a kid, and it really like scratched a lot of my creative itches. Like I got to write, I got to do graphics for people. I was doing websites for people, like websites for fake wrestlers, and
wow.
So around the age of 13 or so, I started doing like freelance work basically, and like listening to people like, I want it to be like this or whatever. And,
right.
And then in high school I worked at a web development firm. I did websites, so I did a lot of logos and print design and web design. I did a ton of that stuff.
So that was the impetus for the first school, I'd imagine.
Yeah, I mean
design.
Graphic design was like that was my first passion in life. I was way into that. And so, but that also gave me, I got really familiar with sort of the process of, working with a client, someone who's kind of directing you.
Sure. But so you're doing all this at music school. Were you telling people about the music that you were doing, like the video game, influenced music? Was that kind of seen as weird? Or different?
Yeah, I was showing some people, but a lot of people thought it was like, they thought it was
not legitimate in some way.
It was kitschy or like,
Yeah.
kind of in poor taste or something.
Sure.
But there was there was a club. There was a video game music club.
Oh, cool.
So I kind of found my people.
Yeah.
And that club was really, really important. I made a lot of good friends there, and we would go to events together. And so I got to know some of the people who worked in the Boston game development scene, and ended up getting some work, through that process, doing internships.
While you were still in college?
Yeah. I did 2 internships in college. One was at MIT,
Wow.
and through that, the audio director, he referred me for another project, and I ended up working at a game studio in Cambridge on a game called Shoot Many Robots, and that was right out of college. I worked on that.
Cool.
Yeah.
And so, what was that? The first game, or did you do something before that?
I did some stuff before that. I did freelance, some contract stuff.
Uh-huh.
I met a guy at DC. The first year I went to the Game Developers Conference, I used college loan money to get there, and
yeah, opposite coast.
Yeah, being part of the Video Game Music Club, I had heard about the Game Audio Network Guild, which was kind of where all the veterans of game audio and video games would tend to congregate. And so I ended up going to like a party or something. I overheard some people talking about chip music, and so I kind of just chimed in because I was like, I know all about that. That was like my whole life at that point. And I ended up meeting this guy, Damien Kaspauer, who he's got his hands in a lot of different pots, if you will. And he hooked me up with a freelance, like a contracting company called Bay Area Sound that does a bunch of game stuff. And so through them, I worked on a game for the Nintendo Wii called Drawn to Life. And then I did...
oh, yeah.
Remember that?
Well, I mean, I just know the game in general. I know I think the first one was like a DS thing, and I never played them, but I was familiar with the games, yeah.
Yeah, the people who made the game where you draw, you write characters, Scribblenauts. Same people who made Scribblenauts. Yeah, so I did some music for that, and then I ended up working on 2 Telltale projects.
Which ones were those?
Puzzle Agent and Puzzle Agent 2.
Okay, I actually own those games. I've never played them. It's just in my Steam thing. But maybe now I got to get around to it. Listen to music.
Yeah, so I got to do some different stuff, and that plus the internship work. I kind of got a feel for, and working at a game studio. So I kind of got a nice, well-rounded sense of my options.
Yeah, well, you got busy real quick. It seems like.
Yeah.
And that's good in this business, this industry or whatever. But so it was Shoot Many Robots like the first thing were you working remotely with for these other projects?
Yeah.
Or was that the first one you were actually in-house? Or
it was the first one where I was like on site. I wasn't in-house because I wasn't an employee, but I was there. Right. I was there on site every day for about 9 months.
Wow.
And the internship I did with MIT was on site. That was for three months, and that was a really positive experience, being on a team and kind of being the audio lead. And so on the heels of that, I was excited to work on site for a studio. And it was, I enjoyed it for a while, but then I kind of got fatigued on the same project for so long. And I guess I just, it wasn't the kind of project where it was pushing my creative boundaries.
Right.
It was for the beginning because I learned a bunch of stuff. I learned how to use Fmod. I did a bunch of sound design, the most sound design I've ever done in my life, like thousands of sounds, and got a lot of experience doing implementation. So that was all great, but at some point I just kind of I felt like, okay, I get it. I've done 1,000 robot sounds.
Yeah.
I think I'm done.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like it's the situation you were describing at the beginning of our conversation, where you turned to the chip music because you could get your ideas out quickly and concisely, whereas this thing sounds like it was relatively drawn out compared to some of the other projects you had done.
Yeah, I think it's just an aspect of my personality. I like to always be moving forward with what I'm doing. So when I feel like I'm stagnating, I'm in some kind of rut, like where I have work to do that is not fulfilling, is not challenging me in a creative way, then after a while I'll get a bit antsy.
Yeah. Well, so how was the process writing this music for these games different, like remote versus like you said, on site? I imagine being on site was much more involved and stuff like that. Whereas with the other stuff, was it like they were done with the game and they're like, here, put some music over it? How does that work with video games generally?
Well, early on,
I know it can vary from project to project.
Sure, it definitely varies a lot, and working on independent projects, being a freelancer is not. There's not a huge distinction because a lot of independent projects these days are just done remotely, and the communication tools are as good as they've ever been with Slack and everything. But back in the day, like 10 years ago when I was doing freelance stuff, I felt completely out of the loop. It was all email, and especially on larger projects like companies, I'd be getting screenshots like, oh, here are the levels we need music for, and then you just write a loop or whatever. So you don't really have a chance to thrive or kind of go above and beyond. It's just, it's the same old status quo, give us a loop. And on some of these projects, actually, my music got placed incorrectly. Actually, in Drawn to Life, I wrote music for one of the levels, one of the worlds, and one of the I think the world map, and those two tracks got switched. And because I was so far removed from the process, like I didn't even find out until the game came out, and I was playing it. I was like, oh, they totally screwed this up. And I did music for cutscenes. Then they changed the timing of the cutscene, and nobody tells you. So that
seems like music is an afterthought to certain developers.
Yeah, and it's not malicious or nefarious.
No.
It's just an overthought, an afterthought. So.
Yeah. Well, and you're doing all these freelance games, doing all this stuff, and then was Fez the big one? Was Fez the big recognition? Because I feel like that's where a lot of people became familiar with you and your music.
Oh yeah, I mean that was a big turning point for sure. Yeah, I mean,
what was the process like that? Can't talk today.
It was very positive. It was an interesting time for me because I was working a lot. I was working full time at Demiurge on Too Many Robots during the day, and then I was writing music for Fez at night and on weekends. So I did that for about a year, and it was a good experience. It was probably the deepest I had gotten as far as implementation ever. Working with Renaud Bedard, the programmer, like had a lot of creative freedom to kind of try cool stuff. Was given access to kind of implement stuff on my own, and so it was a really empowering project in a lot of ways.
And I imagine it wasn't like the Drawn to Life situation you were describing. Was it a lot more? Music wasn't an afterthought with those guys.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, I had over a year to work on it, so it was good.
Because I think the music in Fez is a big aspect of it. It's it tells a story.
I think it gives the game a lot of character and
definitely
personality.
Yeah,
it gives it a soul.
I tried to play Fez, and I'm not super great at puzzle games, so I didn't really get very far. But the art and the music combined kind of make for like the best part about it, which, like you said, it's very gives it a soul. It's pretty charming, and and it's relatively upbeat, but then it'll get some kind of moments where like, oh, this is kind of weird. I feel like I'm in an alternate dimension right now, like just out in space, kind of strange.
Yeah,
but,
there's definitely some different vibes in the game.
Yeah.
It definitely has an adventurous feel.
Mm-hmm.
At times it's melancholy. At times it's weird.
Yeah, I like weird.
I mean, it just kind of reflects the narrative of the game. Because the narrative of the game has all those elements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What were you doing, before and after that? You already said before, but like, did that open a lot of doors? I guess is a phrase.
Yeah. A lot of doors. Because that game did so well, it sold over 1 million copies. So.
Yeah.
I mean, people. It really made. I didn't have to really look for projects after that because it was just the momentum from it was so big that I was getting this opportunity, and it also meant that I could. It made it easier to kind of meet new people. Because we're like, oh, that's the guy who did the music for Fez or whatever.
Sure.
We're like, oh, okay, to gives you a context, which is nice.
Yeah.
In social situations.
Gives you a parenthetical.
Yeah.
Of like, Richard Vreeland, parentheses, Fez, people like, oh, okay. They know that music in that game, so.
Yeah, exactly.
That helps. And you do like Bit Trip and stuff like that. I like Bit Trip a lot. I forget which one
What's
specifically, but I just said you did Bit Trip after that. Yeah.
Yeah. I made a really small contribution to a Bit Trip game.
Yeah, I noticed that. Like, I looked at it was just a few like tracks or something. What was the situation there?
Yeah, they had this like retro mode or something, and they wanted some NES music. So,
I did like that game.
Yeah, I was really happy with how that music came out, and it was a good I'm always looking for an angle with a new project, and for me on that project it was I want to learn how to do like authentic chiptunes, like old school, like chiptunes that you could solder onto like you could put on an NES cartridge,
Right. Yeah.
And so that's what I did. I learned how to use Family Tracker, which is an NES music tracker for Windows. Which is a really, really great piece, I think. It's considering the nature of the music, I think it's pretty accessible and you have a lot of control. So it was, it was a learning curve. I mean, as far as like time to seconds of music ratio is probably one of the highest I've ever experienced.
Right.
It was a lot of work just to write like 5 minutes of music, but I did like throw the kitchen sink at those tracks. So
that's awesome. Well, it's interesting to see like your path in your career here. Your music coming up with this kind of renaissance of games that like reflect that music. Of course, like a lot of the indie stuff around that time was 8-bit or 16-bit stuff, and so it needed music like that. So it's interesting that parallel ran there, because you were doing that like years before it got big again.
Yeah, it was kind of a fortunate, like parallel timeline kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They just coincided right in like 2008, 2009, 2010 area, and then it's been staying strong ever since, I would think. But
yeah, I think there's a growing crowd who want something else, but if it's good, I mean, people will play it. So regardless of the aesthetic, I think. Yeah.
So you were doing game stuff for quite a few years. Because when did Fez come out?
2012, and I worked on it from the fall of 2010 up until that point. Okay.
So you were doing some games and stuff like that, and then how did It Follows happen?
It came out of Fez, actually.
Yeah,
David Robert Mitchell, the director, played Fez, and he liked my stuff.
That's awesome. I had heard that story, so I kind of knew how that one was. But so how did he reach out to you? Just like by email or?
Yeah, he just emailed me, and we kind of had a correspondence that started years before It Follows.
Oh, really?
Yeah, probably like 2 years, probably in 2012 or 2013.
Well, yeah, I guess around when Fez came out.
Yeah, and then we kind of fell out of touch for a while, and when we got back in touch, the film had already been shot, I think, and so it was kind of down to the wire. And even so, I thought I would have about a half year to do it. But then the film got into Cannes Film Festival, and we decided that it really needed to show. We really needed to have the final score in the movie for Cannes, or close to it. Yeah. So I busted my ass for 3 weeks, and we made it happen.
Holy shit! 3 weeks?
Yeah.
You did the soundtrack to It Follows, or the score, in 3 weeks?
Pretty much.
That's incredible. Wow. I mean, and that's another, speaking of Fez, that's another movie that is so kind of enriched by, the music. And in fact, I think it really, not relies on, but it wouldn't be the same movie without it, obviously.
Yeah, I think.
But,
I think
3 weeks.
Yeah, 3 weeks. If I had to write it from scratch, if I had to write it completely from scratch, I don't think I could in 3 weeks. But we had a temp score for the film. And, And, I didn't really copy the temp score as far as, notes or stuff like that. It was just more like general ideas about pacing and what we're trying to accomplish in every scene. And so I would go into the scenes pretty much knowing what I had to do. And having a really clear notion of that was really, really helpful. And also I think scoring linear media is it's like a puzzle, and the decisions that you make can be very discreetly tied to what's happening on screen, and that in some way that makes it a little easier to iterate. It makes it easier to iterate on things and change things and be like, oh yeah, that feels better, that feels worse. It's very immediate. Yeah. When you work on game music, sometimes you have to write the music, you got to put it in the game, you got to be like, oh, does this work? I'm not sure. You come back. Yeah. I mean, that was why Hyperlight Drifter was so challenging. I had to run the game on Windows and edit, implement on Windows, and every time I'd build the game, it would take 10 minutes. And then if I had to make a change, I'd have to boot back into the Mac side and make the change, and then bring it back. And so the whole, if I ever wanted to put any music in the game alongside the experience, I mean, that was going to take me an hour probably. Right. So I had to totally sort of design my workflow around that limitation, and that's part of what made it kind of a grueling process at times. Yeah.
Well, so explain, because I had preconceived notions of how movie scores are done with the movie. How does it even work with doing a score for a movie? Because some people think it's done alongside the movie and all this stuff, but how does that generally work?
I think it's there are different ways to do it, and different composers will approach it in different ways. But in general, I think composers are brought in, will be brought in after the filming, and then they'll start working to picture. Sure. There are instances where that's not true. I know that Michael Giacchino was doing maybe last year was doing three feature-length film scores in the single year. He was doing Inside Out, he was doing Jurassic World, and something else. And so his schedule,
big movies.
Yeah, big movies. And so his schedule, he had some conflicts, and he ended up scoring Inside Out to storyboards. So he scored the whole. I'm pretty sure he scored the whole thing without even looking at the picture. So I mean, it's possible. Yeah. But I definitely find it a lot easier to have something to look at.
Of course. Yeah. And so what was the direction with the? Because this is another aspect of it. How much of it is the director or whoever telling you the sound we're going for? How much of it is you being able to experiment, be creative within that?
Depends on the director.
Yeah. So what was the experience like with It Follows?
David had a very very strong sense of what felt right and what didn't. And luckily for me, he sought me out specifically based on my style, and so it made my life really easy for the most part, because I could just be me, and it worked. There were a couple of cues actually where he had temped in music from Fez into the film, and so he became attached to those pieces, and so I had to try to outdo myself, which was very strange place to be. And it was probably the most difficult part of working on that film, is that it put me in this really awkward position where on at least one cue, I could not seem to write something that David liked more than the Fez cue. And so at the end of the day, I kind of just copped it, you know, and just changed the notes or whatever. Yeah. And so that was like in my view, that was kind of like a failure. But you know, it was such a whirlwind. The whole project took 3 weeks, so I didn't really have time to. Yeah, I mean, you're your own worst critic and all that stuff. I mean, sure. No one's sitting there going like, "Oh man, he stole that one bit from Fez." But it's not even like a subjective thing. It's an objective. I objectively took. I mean, it's basically the same. It's just the notes are different, and there's like slightly different production. But I mean, the structure is exactly the same. So. Well, I think we can forgive you. I hope so. Because the music, and at least the start, is kind of the star, because that first scene with that girl who ends up not being the main character, not being Jay, but that music is instantly the first thing that's like drawing you in. Oh yeah. Like what the hell is happening here, and also this music is scaring the shit out of me right now. So like I think right away the music establishes this movie is going to be using the score as a character. Yeah, totally. And that's all. That was all you. That was me. Yeah, and there's like some it's obviously a horror movie, and there's like scary tracks, but there's a few tracks where like I feel kind of like peaceful listening to it. Sure. I believe like one of the ones I can't remember the name of the track, but it's early on in the movie where you're kind of introducing the characters. I mean there's like the shot of Jay in the pool. Yes, that's exactly what I'm thinking of. Chill, and then there's like when they're walking down the street, and that you see Greg for the first time washing his car. I mean those are pretty, they're not very scary. No, but it kind of sets you up for later on when it is scary. You're like, oh, it's okay. Everything's okay right now. Yeah, I mean, and I'd imagine that's a big balance of doing a score, a horror movie score like that. I think it was good to have scenes where you weren't on edge. Where the music was kind of telling you, okay, you don't have to worry right now. Yeah, definitely. Well, I mean, and the movie itself is awesome, and I imagine you enjoyed the film itself. Yeah, I think it came together really well. Yeah, it's like one of my favorite horror movies from the past. Gosh, I don't know, 15 years. That's awesome. Yeah, the music part of that. So, I mean, I imagine you'd be up for doing more movies and stuff like that, because this was your first, at least feature thing, right? Or was it your first movie, or like you said, linear media thing, period? I did a couple short films with an animator, and those were really fun. This was my first feature. Yeah. And I mean they're probably very different experiences, but could you see a world where you're doing video game and movie stuff together? Like, I mean, doing both at the same time? Give or take. Well, yeah, I mean that's what I did when I made It Follows. When I worked on It Follows, I had game projects going, and. But it's not like you're gonna forsake games and only do movies now, and like you like I'm not married to any medium. Sure. Yeah, I don't care. Because I think there's people in both realms that want you to do more of one thing, but it's like I don't know. They probably fuel each other, and. They're different experiences. And like you said, you don't like being, I don't know, tied down. I don't know. Yeah, I don't want to be pigeonholed. I don't want to be tied down. I mean, I like to explore new things all the time. So, I mean, I'm not attached to working on games or working on films or I just want to work on, stuff that's fulfilling and I feel has value and interests me. So it could be anything. It doesn't even have to be music necessarily.
Right.
So.
Well, what else would you be doing if not music?
I don't know. I mean,
that's the great thing about it. Is it could be anything.
Yeah. It could be sound. I mean, obviously, other things wouldn't fall under the Disasterpeace umbrella.
Sure.
But as far as things that might fall under that umbrella, I've been doing more programming lately. So I've been building tools, music tools. So that's something that I'm interested in. And I don't know. I might write a book at some point.
You have multiple talents.
Sure. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because I've mentioned this many times now on the show, but a lot of the people I have on seem to be kind of what I like to call Renaissance people, where they have these kind of diverse interests and things.
Yeah.
And actually, one of the guys who recommended that I interview you, because I was vaguely familiar with you from It Follows and Fez and some stuff, but he's like, hey, you should really talk to him. He, like your story, was like a graphic designer and stuff like that, and he does music, and he does a lot of chiptune and synthesizer stuff. And I've had a few people on like that just do all these different things, and so I think that's valuable. It fuels all the creativity through all the different projects and stuff like that.
That's cool. What's his name?
His name is Seth. Yeah, a guy named...
I don't know.
His name is Seth S. Scott, his full name.
Okay.
But yeah, I had two guys that I know were like, hey, you should interview him, but... so you can thank them, I guess. Not that I just wasn't really super aware, but when I was like sitting down, I'm like, oh my god, he's done all this great stuff. And I noticed that you did Mini Metro.
Yeah.
And my girlfriend loves Mini Metro.
Awesome.
And plays it all the time. So I just hear the music, and I was like, "Oh, that's him." So that was. And it's thank you for.
I'm in your house.
Thank you for writing good music that I'm able to hear on repeat for hours and hours or whatever. But
sure,
because it doesn't get annoying or anything.
That was the idea. That was definitely the idea with that. To make.
Really, yeah. So was that like kind of because it is like a game that you could sit there and you're doing similar things for a while. So was that like kind of the approach as something that wouldn't get grating or?
Yeah, I wanted it to be really immersive and kind of entrancing and meditative.
And that's what it is, yeah.
And I think it worked out well. I think it's a good counterpart to the gameplay, which is
get frantic.
It's kind of get really frantic and is very sort of like it's very problem solving, puzzly. So I think it works well to kind of reduce the stress level of the game experience.
Yeah, definitely.
Along with
similar
the visuals.
idea to Fez, I think, actually.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I just kind of tapped into that when I saw the visuals. Yeah. I mean, it definitely, when you look at it, it's like, oh, it's nice. It looks really calm. But then you play it and you're like, oh my god, this is getting crazy.
Yeah, you're going insane.
Yeah.
You're tearing your hair out.
Yeah.
So we can talk about a little bit more about Hyper Light Drifter, I guess.
Sure.
Because that's also, another great score and stuff like that. Like I said, I haven't played the game fully, but what was the I don't know, what was the focus there? What was like you mentioned, you try to find angles. What was the angle with Hyper Light Drifter?
The angle, well, that was just a really cool looking game, and I kind of set out with the intention of writing some really sort of cinematic music, really kind of impressionistic. I really wanted to delve into like creating these really colorful musicscapes, and I was experimenting with like trying to write these really sort of long, adventurous pieces of music, and that turned out to not really work for the game, but that's okay. So yeah, I mean, the music is definitely it's definitely a lot less thematic. I think it's a lot less like theme based than I mean, there are themes in the game, but the structure is very different to Fez, for instance, which is more like it's these short pieces and usually really strong melodies, Where Hyperlight, a lot of it is there's not a lot of melody in that game. It's more subtle, I think, for the most part. But then I also got to do boss music, so I got to really kind of flex some muscles at times. So
yeah, how are you approaching like boss music differently than anything you've done in that way?
Well, I mean, I would just I would try to write. For any area, I'd usually start at kind of a calmer bass level, and then as you kind of move through a space, the music would get more and more intense.
Yeah.
But it would get only to a certain level, and then when you actually fight the boss, the idea was, okay, now I'm going to push the intensity way up from where it was.
Yeah.
So in some of those places, I think I did a better job in some places than others, but the intention was to create a really stark contrast where, there's not that many boss fights in the game, so they have to be really impactful. Like, they have to feel like really, really intense.
Yeah.
So, that was an interesting challenge for sure. Because it's like, you write something, you think, oh, it's intense, and then maybe you play it and you're like, oh, it needs to be even more intense. And so you get into this place of diminishing returns where you're just trying to keep pushing it harder and harder and harder.
Sure. Yeah, and that can ultimately become not as hard. Like you said, diminishing returns. You're like, oh, well, no,
it's not that the overall result would be not as heavy. It's just that the improvement
I see.
from one to the next would be diminishing, so it'd be harder and harder to increase the intensity.
Yeah.
Because, with especially with mixing and everything, a lot of times I'd already be the track would already be loud, and there'd be a lot of stuff going on, and then it's like, okay, how can I make this heavier without just making it louder? Because I can't really make it that much louder, There's a limit, so.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think it worked out really well, ultimately.
Oh, well, thank you.
Like I said, I haven't played as much of the game, but I listened to a lot of the music. Because this is another game, of course, that you've done, where I think people are really latching onto that music. Like, I see people posting stuff about, oh man, the soundtrack or the score to Hyperlight Drifter. And that's cool.
Yeah, that is cool.
So things are going well, Rich?
Things are well, yeah.
Yeah.
Just I'm at a place where things are, it's starting to change. I might be moving for a project that I can't talk about yet, but
of course, yeah. No, I'm very familiar with that.
So things are happening, and I'm doing a lot more collaboration these days, which is really fun, and just exploring different stuff. Yeah. So.
That's great. I mean, like I said, the music is great. You've enhanced a lot of great projects to the greatness level. So, good job.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. So where can people find all your stuff and keep up with you and what have you?
You can go to disaster.pizza, and if you can't remember that, I'm sorry.
I think they can. I hope they can. I mean, it's a pretty memorable domain name.
That was the idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, how do you want me? Do you want me to bill this as Disasterpeace or as?
Yeah, you can just bill it as Disasterpeace.
Okay. Sure. I don't know if
whatever
how
you want. I mean, I don't really care. Whatever.
I'll do Disasterpeace parentheses Rich. I don't know. Whatever works. But I mean, how did that name come about too? Yeah. What was the idea of?
You could do Rich Vreeland parentheses Disasterpeace. That
sure.
Because you're talking to me. Rich,
I'm not
Rich,
talking to
the human being. Disasterpeace is like an entity. It's
sure.
It's not me.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was probably 18 or something, and I was trying to come up with a cool band name, and I came up with Disasterpeace as a play on Masterpiece, and then took it one step further. And thought, peace, peace sign, would be a good kind of antithetical idea to disaster. And I kind of liked the notion of this word working on multiple levels. Yeah. And then I kind of did the same thing with the monogram, which is, it's a skull it's the letters
Uh-huh.
DP, and then it's also 2 music notes.
Doing some Prince action there. Artist formerly known as Rich Vreeland, or you could just use that symbol.
Just the
as
monogram, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not
as your name.
I mean, I know that. Yeah, I don't want to be called the artist formerly. That's just a mouthful. So, and I know that wasn't Prince's intention, but that's what happens. What happens.
Yeah.
Oh.
But I mean, it's been a great conversation. Appreciate you coming on the show. It was a good conversation.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Right. All right. Great talk with Rich. I think we got into some cool territory. Learned a lot about the process of scoring or composing for a video game or movie. I love doing this podcast, guys. Isn't that a good feeling? Next week on the show, we have Jeff Smith, comics creator, writer, artist, most well known for Bone, an awesome comic series, and I think kind of a landmark series in terms of self-released alternative comics in a time when that wasn't quite the norm. So, and he's done stuff since then. Razzle, Tukey, Say Anything's In Defense of the Genre album cover, which I talked to him about. I love Say Anything. So that was a great conversation. I think we hit it off, and that'll be next week. So in the meantime, if you want to keep up with the podcast and all the goings on, there we go. You can like the podcast on Facebook, Butterfly Effect Podcast. You can subscribe on YouTube, Butterfly Effect Podcast. You can follow on Twitter at Butterfly Pod. You can follow me on Twitter at Edeltodd, ETTLETODD. And you can email with suggestions, feedback, what have you, at trettleman@gmail.com, trettleman@gmail.com. Podcast is on Spreaker. That's where it's hosted, and everything's funneled through there. And it's on iTunes, of course. You can subscribe on iTunes. There's an issue where there's one episode not popping up, the episode number 11 with Chris Barassa. It's in my RSS feed, just for some reason not on iTunes, and I'm trying to sort that out. It kind of sucks though, because it was a good conversation, and I don't want one episode to be missing, like that. It's kind of weird. But anyways, keep up with all the stuff that way, and I'll see you next week. Talk to you later.